I was halfway into setting up the third folding table when I heard the unmistakable sound of clacking heels and fake outrage. Barbara, our HOA president. If you've never met a woman who weaponizes rulebooks like they're sacred scrolls, you're lucky. Barbara had that tight, pinched face, a bob haircut that looked like it hadn't moved since the 90s, and enough energy to ruin 5 weekends at once. "Franklin Abernathy," she snapped, marching up my driveway like she owned the concrete. "You didn't get HOA approval for this garage sale." I didn't stop stacking my son's old toys. "Barbara, it's a garage sale. I checked the bylaws. We're allowed 2 per year." She crossed her arms. "Not without 72 hours written notice to the board and prior approval. You're disrupting the visual harmony of the neighborhood." I looked around. Kids were biking, a neighbor waved from across the street, and someone was already browsing the pile of vintage records. "Pretty sure nobody's harmony is being shattered by used lawn chairs and a blender." She whipped out her phone like it was a badge. "I'm calling the police. This is an unauthorized commercial event and you're in violation of Section 8, Article 3, I chuckled. "I'll wait right here." 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Ramirez stepped out, took one look at the scene, my wife Rachel helping an elderly couple carry off a lamp. My kid Donovan selling lemonade at the curb, and sighed like he knew exactly what kind of nonsense he'd been dragged into. Barbara was already waving him down. "Officer, thank goodness. This man is holding an illegal garage sale and violating HOA policy. He refused to shut it down and he's creating a nuisance." Officer Ramirez walked over to me. "You Franklin?" "Yep. You got ID?" I handed it over. He looked at it, then at the garage sale, then back at Barbara. "Ma'am, a garage sale on private property is legal in this state unless it violates city code. This doesn't." Barbara's face went red. "But the HOAs can't override state law, ma'am. You'd need a city ordinance to back that up." She tried again. "Well, he's being aggressive and disrespectful. I feel harassed." "You approached him," Ramirez said, his tone flat. "You escalated and I'm going to need your ID now." That stopped her cold. "What?" "Why? Because under municipal code, falsely reporting a violation and using law enforcement to enforce civil disputes can be considered harassment." Barbara sputtered. "You're citing me." Officer Ramirez pulled out his notepad. "Yes, ma'am, you're getting a citation. If you keep this up, you'll be looking at a misdemeanor." I had to turn away to keep from laughing. Rachel handed the officer a cup of lemonade. "On the house, officer," he grinned. "Thanks, and Franklin, you're good to keep selling as long as you want. Just don't block the sidewalk." Barbara stomped off, muttering about ungrateful peasants and lawyers. I leaned over and told Rachel, "This is going to get worse before it gets better," and I was right. She wasn't done with us yet. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories the next morning. I opened the mailbox to find a thick envelope from the HOA tucked between a flyer for gutter cleaning and a pizza coupon. The paper was heavier than usual, like they'd gone out of their way to make the threat feel more official. That was Barbara's way, make everything look more important than it was. Inside was a notice of violation with a fine of $500 for operating a commercial enterprise without board approval. They'd even included grainy photos of me standing in my own driveway, selling a $10 toaster. At the bottom, Barbara had hand-signed it with a sweeping flourish like she was the queen of suburbia. Rachel leaned over my shoulder. "They're doubling down, looks like it. But here's the thing, this isn't just a fine. They're forwarding it to collections if we don't pay within 30 days. She narrowed her eyes. "They can't do that without a legal judgment." "Nope, but most folks don't know that. They just pay out of fear." We sat down at the kitchen table, and I pulled out the HOA bylaws I'd printed months ago, the ones I kept in a red binder labeled, "In Case of Barbara." We combed through the sections on enforcement authority, and sure enough, nowhere did it say the HOA could refer fines to collections without a court order. I circled the section in thick red ink. Rachel tapped the page. She's banking on intimidation. This is scare mail. Yeah, I said, but I'm not just going to ignore it. I want to know how she's getting those photos. We didn't have cameras pointed at the street, but our neighbor Carlos did. He worked nights and had wired his entire property with motion-activated security. I caught him while he was watering his hydrangeas. Hey Carlos, I said, you mind checking your footage from yesterday morning? I think someone was on our property without permission. He nodded. Sure. You think it was the HOA? Wouldn't be surprised. He invited me inside and pulled the video up on a tablet. We fast-forwarded through hours of wind-blown branches and the occasional squirrel until we hit the right window. There, plain as day, was Barbara at 6:30 in the morning, walking up my driveway and snapping photos with her phone. She even leaned over my rear fence at one point to get a better angle of the items inside the garage. Carlos paused the footage. She's on your property in half of these. That's trespassing. Yeah, I said, pressing my fingers against my temple. And if she forwarded pictures taken from private property to the board as evidence, she just handed me a gift wrapped in legal tape. I asked Carlos if he'd email me copies. He sent them over within the hour. I added them to the folder I'd already started. Between that, the citation Ramirez gave her, and the bogus fine, I was building a neat little stack of leverage. That evening, I emailed the board excluding Barbara and requested a hearing to dispute the fine. I attached a copy of the video stills, the relevant portion of the bylaws, and a copy of the police citation with her name on it. I kept the tone polite but firm, no threats, just facts. 2 days later, I got a reply from Greg, the HOA's treasurer. He was the only board member who ever showed signs of a conscience. Frank, he wrote, we were unaware of the police citation. This changes things. We'll schedule a hearing within the week. Please bring all documentation. That was the first crack in Barbara's armor. At the hearing, they met in the clubhouse, one of those beige, echoey rooms with stackable chairs and a podium nobody ever used. I showed up with a file folder and a USB stick. Rachel came too, mostly to make sure I didn't say anything too colorful. Greg opened the meeting. We're here to review the violation issued to Mr. Abernathy regarding an alleged unauthorized commercial event. Mr. Abernathy has requested the fine be dismissed. Mr. Abernathy, you may begin. I stood and plugged in the USB. The screen behind me lit up with a still frame of Barbara leaning over my fence, phone in hand. This is your HOA president, I said, on my property, without permission, taking photos to support a fine that violates your own bylaws. I clicked through to the next image. Here she is again, this time stepping past the sidewalk line. And here, I pointed, you can see she's using a zoom lens to photograph items inside my garage. That's not just overreach, that's trespassing. Someone in the back coughed. Greg looked up from his notes. These were taken by my neighbor's security system, time-stamped. I also have the officer's report from when Barbara called the police on me. The officer not only confirmed the sale was legal, he cited her for harassment. There was a long pause. Barbara, who had been sitting stiffly 2 seats down, spoke up. He didn't understand the HOA's rules. This isn't about the law, it's about order, about keeping the neighborhood from becoming. Greg cut her off. Barbara, you trespassed to gather evidence. You filed a false report. And you attempted to fine a resident based on a rule that doesn't exist in any enforceable form. She bristled. You're all letting him undermine the board. No, Greg said. We're acknowledging that you overstepped. Another board member, Denise, who rarely said anything at meetings, cleared her throat. I moved to dismiss the violation and remove the fine. And I think we should audit all violation notices sent in the past 6 months. If this happened once, it's probably happened before, Greg nodded. Seconded, all in favor, 4 hands went up. Barbara kept hers glued to her lap. Motion passes, Greg said. Frank, the fine is voided. We'll notify collections not to pursue it. Barbara stood abruptly. This is a mistake. You're setting a precedent that will ruin this community. No, Greg said evenly. We're setting a precedent that says we follow the law. After the meeting, Greg caught up with me in the parking lot. I'm sorry this happened, he said. She's been getting more aggressive lately. Then maybe it's time someone checked how she's been interpreting the bylaws, I said, and how many fines she's pushed through without board review. He nodded slowly. I think you're right. If you have time, maybe you could help us go through the records. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't want to get sucked into board politics, but I also didn't want anyone else getting steamrolled the way she tried to do to me. By the time I got home, there was a small group of neighbors gathered on my lawn. Word had spread. Carlos had brought beers. Mrs. Nguyen from 2 doors down handed me a plate of cookies. You gave her a taste of her own medicine, she said, smiling warmly. About time. I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some not, and realized something. This wasn't just about one garage sale or a fine. This was about people being tired of being bullied by someone who thought the HOA made her untouchable. Rachel raised her cup. To Frank. The man who made Barbara blink. Everyone laughed. But in the back of my mind, I knew Barbara wasn't going to take this lying down. People like her never did. A week passed without a peep from Barbara. The quiet was unnatural, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Rachel noticed it too. On Thursday morning, while we were putting up new shelves in the garage, she cocked her head and said, "She's not done. She's just regrouping." She wasn't wrong. On Sunday evening, right as I was settling down to watch a documentary about old train heists, my phone buzzed. It was Greg. "I need to show you something," he said, voice low and tense. He showed up 20 minutes later with a manila folder under his arm and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "She tried to rewrite the violation log," he said, handing me a printout smeared with red ink and white out. Doctored entries, backdated approvals, made it look like a dozen fines were pre-approved when they weren't. I only caught it because the timestamps on the digital versions don't match the paper copies. Rachel leaned in. "That's document tampering," Greg nodded. "And that's not even the worst part." He pulled out another sheet. This one was a photocopy of a check, not just any check. A reimbursement from the HOA's discretionary fund made out to Barbara L. Cartwright for $700. The memo line read, "Community Beautification Garden Tools." "There hasn't been any new landscaping in 6 months," I said. "She bought a new patio set," Greg muttered. "I saw it delivered to her backyard. Same amount, same day." I stared at the check. So she's embezzling HOA funds and falsifying oversight records. "And if she's doing that," Rachel said, "imagine what we'd find if we audited the whole account." Greg hesitated. "That's actually why I'm here. I need help. I don't know what else she's covered up, and I don't want to confront her alone." We agreed to help, but I made one thing clear. If we find anything criminal, we're not handling it internally. No cover-ups, no slaps on the wrist. We go to the authorities. Greg didn't argue. He just nodded and passed me a flash drive. It took 3 nights of sorting through poorly scanned receipts and patchy meeting minutes. Rachel and I cross-referenced every expense against actual projects. A pattern emerged. Barbara had been submitting inflated invoices for phantom services. One payment labeled pest control led to a company that didn't even exist. Another for holiday lighting installation was dated in June. The total, just over $9,000 in suspicious payments over the past year. We compiled everything: receipts, scanned checks, board minutes, and financial summaries, and brought it to Officer Ramirez. He listened without interrupting, then asked for a copy of the flash drive. "This is fraud. Flat out," he said, eyes narrowing as he flipped through the folder. "You did the right thing bringing this in. I'll open a report and forward it to the county's financial crimes unit. You'll probably be contacted by a detective." 2 days later, a plain gray sedan pulled into our driveway. Detective Hallman introduced himself with a firm handshake and a canvas case full of forms. "I've seen this before," he said as he spread out a timeline on our dining room table. "Small associations think no one's watching. They get bold. It usually starts with reimbursements." He interviewed Greg next, then filed a warrant for the HOA's bank records. Within a week, the county had frozen the discretionary fund. Barbara's signature was on every questionable transaction. Still, she didn't back down. She showed up at the next board meeting wearing pearls and acting like nothing had happened. When Greg informed her the financial account had been frozen pending investigation, she barely flinched. "This is political," she said, loud enough for the residents gathered to hear. "This is a smear campaign by people who resent order." Someone from the back shouted, "Order doesn't come with a stolen patio set, Barbara." She ignored it. "I've given this community structure, stability. If you let petty grievances undermine that," Detective Hallman stepped into the room. He'd been waiting outside with 2 uniformed officers. "Ma'am," he said, walking up the aisle as the room fell silent, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, falsifying financial records, and misuse of community funds." Barbara's pearl necklace twisted as she turned toward him. "You can't be serious. I am the president of this association." He held up a copy of the warrant. "Not anymore." As she was handcuffed and escorted out, people began clapping, not loud at first, but it grew row by row until it filled the whole clubhouse. Even Denise, normally quiet, stood and gave a sharp nod. Later that night, Greg called. "We'll need a temporary president, someone the community trusts." I didn't hesitate. "Not me. Not full time," he said. "Just until we can hold an election." "You're the reason this came to light." I still wasn't thrilled, but Rachel elbowed me gently. "You always say you want things run right. This is your chance." So I agreed on one condition. All records are digitized and open to all residents. Every meeting streamed. "Every dollar accounted for," Greg laughed. "Deal." In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed in small but meaningful ways. People who once avoided HOA meetings started showing up. Carlos offered to help set up a community website. Mrs. Nguyen took over the garden committee and actually planted flowers instead of just talking about them. And one afternoon, as I was walking back from the mailbox, a teen from the next block shouted, "Hey, you're the guy who got Barbara arrested." I just waved and kept walking. Because honestly, that wasn't the part I was proudest of. The part that mattered was this. We'd taken back control of our neighborhood not with shouting or threats, but with facts, patience, and a folder full of receipts. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't afraid to speak up. They knew someone was finally listening. By the time the local paper picked up the story, it was already old news to the neighborhood. Still, seeing the headline "HOA President Arrested for Embezzlement," falsified violations printed in black and white gave everything a strange sense of finality. The article didn't mention Barbara's name until the 4th paragraph, but everyone in the area knew exactly who it was about. The photo they used, though blurry, showed enough of her expression during the arrest to send a ripple of satisfaction through the community. Rachel folded the paper and slid it into the drawer next to our coffee pot. "We should keep that. Frame it, maybe." Right next to the blender she tried to fine us over. I just raised my eyebrows. Let's not tempt karma. We've still got a lot of cleaning up to do. The interim board had already begun stabilizing the HOA's operations. Denise had taken over finances temporarily and brought in her cousin, a certified accountant, to audit the books. Rachel, against her better judgment, agreed to organize a neighborhood review committee to inspect all pending violations. I focused on reworking the bylaws, not rewriting them, just clarifying the vague language Barbara had used to push through her personal agenda. One morning, Greg called with a new development. The detective found something strange in the HOA's storage unit, he said. "You might want to see this." The unit was located behind the community center, a rust-colored metal box barely larger than a single-car garage. When we arrived, 2 uniformed officers were already there, along with Detective Hallman. He held open the door, revealing rows of plastic storage bins and a folding table covered in documents. "There's something you'll want to see," Hallman said, leading us to the back. A cardboard banker's box sat open, labeled Archives 2018-2020. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, fine notices, most of them never sent. Hallman pulled one out and handed it to me. The name on the front was familiar. Dorothy Smalls, a widow who had moved out of the neighborhood 2 years ago under mysterious circumstances. This one was never mailed, Hallman said, but it's postmarked and marked delinquent. Rachel frowned. Why would she bother creating fines and then not send them? Hallman gestured to a stack of checks. Because the payments still showed up. These are copies of checks deposited into the HOA account, all from residents who never got violation notices until after they sold or moved. We believe she was backdating fines after people left, then quietly deducting the amounts from their escrow balances without alerting them. Greg's jaw tensed. That's mail fraud. And wire fraud if she altered digital records to match. We've already begun contacting the impacted homeowners, said Hallman. So far, 6 have confirmed they never saw the charges until closing, the total's nearing 15,000. I shook my head. That's theft. Plain and simple. Felony theft, Hallman added. And since her position gave her access through fiduciary trust, the charges carry enhanced penalties. The DA's preparing to file the full case. Later that week, Barbara was formally indicted on multiple felony counts. The charges included embezzlement, falsification of public documents, fraudulent conversion, and mail fraud. When the court date was announced, Greg notified the community and opened the meeting hall for anyone who wanted to attend. I wasn't sure how many people would show. But when Rachel and I arrived, we found nearly 24 neighbors already waiting in the courthouse parking lot. Even Carlos brought folding chairs and a thermos of coffee. Inside the courtroom, Barbara wore a navy pantsuit and a look of forced indifference. Her attorney, a man with slicked back hair and a perpetually clenched jaw, tried to argue that the charges were exaggerated, that she had acted in good faith as a volunteer leader. But the prosecution had the checks, the altered logs, and the testimonies of over a dozen residents. Her good faith didn't hold up. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with wireframe glasses, didn't take long to issue her decision. Given the volume and consistency of the evidence, she said, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Bail is denied due to risk of document tampering and witness intimidation. Barbara didn't speak as she was taken into custody. She didn't even look at us. But as she passed our row, I noticed her eyes dart briefly toward Rachel before snapping forward again. Outside, people were buzzing with relief. Greg leaned over. The trial's probably months off, but this sends a message. It does, I agreed, but let's make sure it's not just a one-time cleanup. Over the next 6 weeks, we overhauled the HOA's structure. We pushed through 3 key reforms. First, we made financial transparency mandatory. Every expense over $50 had to be published monthly, down to the receipt. Second, we established a rotating audit committee made up of 5 non-board residents. No one could serve 2 terms in a row. Third, we rewrote the violation process from the ground up. Now, no fine could be issued without a signed approval by at least 2 board members and photographic evidence taken from public view. All violations had to be delivered in person or by certified mail, and any resident could appeal directly to the committee without fear of retaliation. At the next community meeting, I stepped up to the podium, the same one nobody had used before, and cleared my throat. We've all seen what happens when one person has too much unchecked authority. This isn't about overcorrecting, it's about restoring trust. These reforms don't just protect us from another Barbara. They protect us from complacency. The room applauded, not wildly, but with a kind of quiet, determined energy that told me people were finally invested again. After the meeting, Denise handed me a sealed envelope. This came to the HOA mailbox yesterday. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no signature. It read, "You think this is over, it never is." Greg read it over my shoulder. "You think she'd help?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she's just trying to scare us one last time." We turned the letter over to Detective Hallman, who agreed to run a handwriting analysis and check the postmark. But in the meantime, we didn't let it shake us. If anything, it reaffirmed the need for everything we'd built. 2 months later, Barbara pled guilty to 3 counts of felony theft and 1 count of falsifying records. Her sentence: 4 years probation, 6 months of house arrest, and full restitution to all affected homeowners. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board for life. Not everyone was satisfied with the sentence, but I understood the DA's choice. A trial would have dragged on. This way, the money came back and the neighborhood could move on. Rachel and I made a deal that night: no more board positions, no more meetings unless absolutely necessary. We'd done what we set out to do. The community was stronger, the rules were clearer, and the HOA was no longer a tool for control, but a framework for cooperation. One afternoon that fall, I was raking leaves when a new couple walked by. They just moved in young, maybe early 30s, carrying takeout and looking a bit overwhelmed. "You're the one who stood up to the HOA, right?" the guy asked. I nodded. He grinned. "Thanks. We were nervous about buying here, but everyone keeps saying it's different now." I shrugged. "It is. Took a while, but it's worth it now." They waved and kept walking. Rachel stepped onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of cider. She handed me one and looked out at the street, where kids were riding scooters and someone was stringing up early Halloween decorations. "Looks like peace and quiet finally stuck," she said. "For now," I replied. "But if anything stirs again, we've got the blueprint." And we did. Because once you learn how to stand up to the bully behind the clipboard, you never